Good morning and welcome to Morning Devotions. My name is Paul Troost, and the print I have on the wall behind me is by an artist named Jack Kirby. That is the same Jack Kirby who is the co-creator of Captain America and Fantastic Four and the Avengers and the X-Men and most of the Marvel Universe. This piece is titled Jacob and the Angel. And it is a symbolic representation of the story that I am selected for reading today out of Genesis, a story you all know. And it requires some setup, even if you don't know it or remember it. Everybody does remember Jacob, the story of Jacob and Esau, and how he tricked his brother out of his inheritance. And this story takes place many years later. Jacob is returning home to Canaan with his family after many years of service under Laban. Jacob has received the news that his brother is on his way with 400 men. His brother is threatened to kill him because of his past trickery. So in the previous verses, Jacob sends some gifts of appeasement, and it's made pretty clear that he's afraid for his life and family. And when we come to this passage, he's praying to God for help. He's sent his family and possessions on ahead of him to protect them, and he's left alone in his camp. And reading is from Genesis 32, starting at chapter 22. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask me your name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle. Well, this is an unusual story of a physical confrontation with God. What is the Lord trying to do here exactly? I mean, is he trying to prevent Jacob from reaching Canaan, or is this wrestling some sort of a test? Well, God blesses him with a new name and with a new identity. Jacob, after this match, is no longer associated as the swindler and trickster he's been in the past. He is a new creation. He's filled with God's blessing and with a divine purpose to establish the Israelite nation. So the struggle was real. The struggle was with God or an angel. But it's also, it's symbolic, very symbolic. The struggle is symbolic of Jacob's struggle with his inner self. I mean, God wanted to enter into a relationship with Jacob. However, he couldn't do so until Jacob admitted his weakness of his reliance on deceit and trickery. So when Jacob refused to surrender to God, mere divine touch on the hip forced him to admit his utter need for God. So take note of what God did when he wrestled Jacob. Jacob began that night in fear, dreading Esau's arrival. He was full of fear and desperation. There were 400 men, and they're on their way to kill him. But he ended that night with a struggle with God, with God's blessing, and a renewed faith. And the story goes on. I didn't read it, but obviously he survives his encounter with Esau, who was forgiving after Jacob prostrates himself to him. So the story here, though, on the struggle with God is that all of our struggling with God in faith leads to peace. When God calls us to wrestle with Him, there's always more going on than we first understand, and God always uses it to transform us for good. Remember, God pursued Jacob for this match. God was the initiator here. Jacob was stewing in his own anxieties and fears, rightfully so. There was a slaughter squad on their way, until God showed up that night. The wrestling drew Jacob out of his fearful preoccupation and forced him to focus on God. God will meet all of us in our anguish and in our fear and in our uncertainty. But He may not meet you in the way you expect or desire, like in this story. So, are we wrestling with God too? I mean, what does that mean to wrestle with God? Well, I think we're wrestling with God when we try to impose our will on other people, or replace our will with the will of God, or assume our will is the will of God. God wrestles with us when we go through the trials and troubles of life. So wrestling with God is a good thing if we learn to humble ourselves and trust in God. The God of Jacob is our refuge and our only hope. So, blessings to you all. I hope you are all doing well, and I do look forward to the time when we can all be together and worship again. Now, go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Amen.